Welcome to my first ever build guide for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. I wasn't originally planning on making any of these, as I usually fall more on the RP and flavor side of the spectrum, but in my Elden Ring video on my main channel, I mentioned that one of my first Pathfinder characters had his combat style partially based on the bell-bearing hunter at later levels. And a few comments asked if I could post that build, and so I cleaned it up a little bit to give it a little bit more focus towards the bell-bearing hunter specifically, and figured I'd give it a shot here. So a couple things to lead with. At my table, you usually play with variant archetype, with the home rule that you can have 2 ongoing archetypes at once, but you cannot take a 3rd dedication feat until you have at least 3 feats in one of those first archetypes. I'm going to have this build initially without variant archetype, then I'm going to run over some additional feats I'd use to escalate the build a little bit if you're using some of those. In addition, the features that took this character to feeling similar to the bell-bearing hunter did come pretty late in the build and required a little bit of flavor. When it did, it became one of my favorite martial builds. It focuses a lot on really heavy damage, particularly to large groups of enemies, and also setting up other party members to deal with enemies. I'll be using uncommon options, though I'll avoid all rare options, since those are often tougher to get approved. Overall, I am going to have a class feat and skill feat recommendation for every level, but as with any build, all of this can be shifted around as you see fit. 2E is a super modular game, and I encourage anyone who likes the concept of this build but doesn't like certain parts or wants to tie in other components, please be flexible with this. This is all about having fun, and though there's stuff that is required in order to make this build work as effectively as it did, you can customize things, focus on different things, different skills, different ideas. Everything can always shift around. To start, for Ancestry, things are pretty flexible, especially if your table plays with free stat boosts. You'll want your Strength and Intelligence boosted, since those will be our main 2 stats. In the campaign I used this build in, I played a human Sully, but today I'll be building a human Talos. I could also see this build really excelling with an Orc, Hobgoblin, or Minotaur. The only ancestries that I'd see struggling here are small or tiny creatures, because we'll be utilizing some grappling mechanics. So halflings, puppets, and sprites will probably not find as much success with elements of this build. Backgrounds, similarly, are very flexible, with the main stat boosts, again, being Strength and Intelligence. Though we'll need training in Athletics and Intimidation as our main 2 skills, you'll have absolutely no shortage of skills as an Intelligence class. Personally, I'm preferential to Warrior to get Intimidating Glare, to skip a feat tax in the early game, but Criminal, Hired Killer, or Junker can also all work really well. And so long as you get those stat bonuses and you find another place to slip the Intimidating Glare skill feed in, you should be good to go. For our class, the way we're eventually going to get to attack like the bell-bearing hunter without anything extra is by using the Inventor class with a weapon innovation, giving us another intelligence boost. For the ability scores, we're going to boost Strength, Con, Intelligence, and Charisma. We'll end up eventually being in heavy armor, so we're going to start with below average AC for the first couple of levels, but that should adjust pretty quickly. For skills, we automatically get 7 skills on top of crafting and our background. Like I said, you'll absolutely need Athletics and Intimidation, but I highly recommend Arcana, Occultism, Society, and Stealth. Your high intelligence means the high Arcana, Occultism, and Society will stay high, which are great for recall knowledge checks, and Stealth is always a good idea. Past that, Acrobatics is always nice to have because it gives you some niche balance rolls and some other mechanical coverage. And past that, I recommend picking up skills that you personally enjoy or would help with your specific game. If there's some survival mechanics, survival is not bad. If one of your party members needs that proficiency, Thievery might not be a bad idea. And Deception and Diplomacy are always good, since we're going to be having some charisma investment over the course of the game. Ancestry feats will of course vary based off of what you chose as your ancestry, but if you're going human Talos like me, I recommend Talos' Reflective Defense. It gives us a decent once per 10-minute defensive reaction to use at lower levels outside of our shield. Similarly, level 1 Inventor feats are pretty limited. Explosive Leap is nice for early mobility, but will have much better unstable actions just by level 4. So instead, I recommend Tamper. The fact it has Manipulate means you'll really need to watch out for reactive strikes, but Tamper is a really good action that does not increase your multiple attack penalty, uses your crafting, and can set you up to get easier crits with some of our bigger swings. In terms of equipment, I recommend going with a Bastard Sword as your primary innovation and a Steel Shield. For the most part, we're going to be two-handing the Bastard Sword, but with Shield Block as a free feat at level 1, and some later abilities we're going to get, we'll be able to pull out the shield for more defensive scenarios. For the initial modification, there's a little bit of a choice here. Entangling Form gives the Bastard Sword the Grapple and Trip traits, which lets you take those actions without needing a free hand, and Hefty Composition will give you Shove and Bludgeoning damage. We're eventually going to use Crushing Runes on our weapon. which of course requires that bludgeoning damage and works really well with the rest of the build, but for now I'm with Entangling Form so you can take advantage of that tripping and grappling from having a high athletics. We'll get the other one later on, but choosing if you want to grapple or trip or build towards crushing right off the bat is going to be your first main choice. For armor, put on any inexpensive set of medium level armor. That's going to be the first thing we upgrade as we continue forward. At level 2, there isn't a class feat we need, which means I recommend archetyping immediately into the Sentinel Dedication. That's going to give us heavy armor proficiency, and even if we use variant archetype, my plan will still have Sentinel here, since I play with that 2 ongoing dedications at a time. Now, we won't be able to make proper use of this dedication and full plate in general until we're level 5, but we can upgrade to half plate immediately, putting you at the expected AC for your level, and only taking a 5-foot speed penalty, which is pretty nice. For our skill feat, we're going to take Titan Wrestler. Since we're a medium creature, that means we're going to be able to grapple huge creatures, and as we continue to advance our athletics, we'll be able to start grappling any size of creature, which is going to be really nice. At level 3, your crafting is going to advance automatically, so I recommend advancing athletics along with it to improve your grapple and trip options. For your general feat, the big ones we're eventually going to want to take are Fleet, Incredible Initiative, and Toughness. Toughness is always nice for your health and durability, and since our speed is on the lower side, especially with the heavy armor minus, Fleet is always really good. And since we're going to have a low wisdom and Inventor has really garbage perception progression, our initiative is going to need all the help it can get. Level 4 is a big power strike. We're going to get Megaton Strike, which is effectively better Vicious Strike. Whenever we have the chance, we're going to be using this as our main attack. We are going to use Unstable Megaton Strike to add just a little more damage onto that on top of it. For skill feats, there's nothing too critical here, but Magical Crafting can lead you down that route, or Powerful Leap if you're playing a game that requires a little bit more maneuverability. At level 5, with the ability increase, our strength is finally going to reach +4, then we're going to boost Con, Int, and Charisma. For your skill boost, I recommend getting Intimidation to Expert at this point, and now that we have a +2 Charisma, we can get a Demon Mask on top of that, which I liked flavoring as Eleanor's Helmet, and you can Demoralize into a Megaton Strike, which is a great way to optimize your chance to crit, which again, really high damage at really early levels. With our strength finally at a +4, we're also going to finally be upgrading to full plate. If we combine this with bringing out our shield at any point, that means we have the potential to either deal really high damage or tank hits really well. We're going to fall behind champions and other tanks in the mid-levels, but despite our lower health, we can still keep standing pretty well, and there were definitely some fights, since our campaign started at level 5, that I was immediately going tank mode rather than full offense. For our Ancestry feat, I recommend Noble Resolve here. Our will saves advance pretty well as an investigator, but we have that low wisdom, so a +1 circumstance to any mental effect is going to give us a little bit of help to what's going to be one of our biggest weaknesses. At level 6, we're going to pick up Visual Fidelity. That gives us dark vision and the ability to see invisible creatures, meaning we become amazing nighttime hunters. For skill feats, pick up Intimidating Prowess, which is going to raise our intimidation rolls even higher. At level 7, your crafting automatically advances to Master, and I recommend boosting your athletics along with it. Then take one of the general feats you missed out on at level 3. You're going to get a ton of stuff here. Your Overdrive, which is already Inventor's big way to reliably deal damage, gets better. Your reflex save is going to go up. You're going to get weapon specialization, which is going to increase your damage, and you get a breakthrough innovation. Personally, I recommend Manifold Alloy, which allows you to always hit metal weaknesses against monsters. At level 8, we get Manifold Modifications, meaning we either get Entangling Form or Hefty Composition, whichever one of those initial breakthroughs we didn't get previously. Once we are able to put Crushing on our weapon, which we should be able to afford at this point, anytime that we land a crit, enemies will become off guard, since we have that critical specialization, as well as clumsy and enfeebled. Since we have a high AC build, this is not only going to set us up to be more tanky, but it's going to make it easier to grab, trip, or wail away at your opponents, and set your allies up to get some huge damage off on those opponents as soon as you hit that critical hit. And your Intimidation means that you're also able to get into these advantageous situations easier, since you can apply some debuffs yourself. For skill feats, I recommend either Quick Climb or Quick Swim. Obviously, we're going to be reaching Legendary in Athletics, so we'll get a Climb or a Swim Speed, which is just nice to have. Level 9 finally brings us to Master and Intimidation, and for the offensive boost ability, we're going to get a d6 of the damage type we select. For the flavor, I like to use Fire or shift it to something that I know will be hitting a weakness if I know the kind of enemies we're going against. But if you select Momentum here, which adds a d6 of bludgeoning damage, that means you can get rid of the Hefty Composition breakthrough, since you'll have bludgeoning damage on the weapon, and thus unlock access to using Crushing Runes. That means you can change your level 8 feat to something like Overdrive Ally if you want to be more of a buff-focused character, or you can just shift around to a different breakthrough if there's something else that you personally want. For the Ancestry feat, this one's a bit of a toss-up. There's not really anything great. You can use Human to get another general feat if you want something like Die Hard. You can use Multi-Talented to get the Mulder dedication if there's an advanced weapon you have your eye on. Or you can just get another first level class feat if you do want one. It's fully up to you. Nothing's important to the build. At level 10, we're going to keep scaling up, of course, partial boost in strength, then continue to raise your con, intelligence, and charisma. With this, with your intelligence finally hitting the +5, you'll get another skill. Again, we already have everything we need. It's entirely up to flavor at this point. For class feats, we're going to be getting Distracting Explosion, which is a reaction that lets you make a melee strike against any creature using a concentrate action. Not a manipulate, a concentrate, which is amazing for keeping pressure on spellcasters. Even if you've managed to already get Reactive Strike from some other archetype that you're doing, the fact you can make this attack unstable to make a hit completely disrupt any concentrate action, which is almost every spell in the game, means you can get tons of mileage and sometimes almost completely deactivate a boss for a turn. For your skill feat, now that we're Master in Intimidation, we're going to grab Battle Cry, which lets you open with a free Intimidation at the start of battle, and lets you get more Intimidation after you land crits. That means if you've upgraded to Greater Crushing at this point, which means you're doing Clumsy 2 and Feeble 2, and I'll get into that equipment at a later portion of the video, when you crit, if you succeed your Demoralize, you're going to make them Off Guard, Clumsy 2, and Intimidated, which is up to a -5, potentially a -6 armor class on your target, and that can basically make anyone free to hit. That can make bosses easy to hit for the rest of your party for a round. It's huge. At level 11, you'll be able to start on advancing a skill, you'll get up to Legendary over time. Since I want to go for a Bell-Bearing Hunter vibe for this example, I decided to go with Stealth, which made appearing out of the shadows just a little bit easier despite our lower than usual dex. For our general feat, we're going to finally pick up the last of that trio of feats that we wanted back at level 3, and we're also going to be enjoying Expert in Armor and Master in Will saves here. Level 12 is going to take us back to the Sentinel dedication. We're going to pick up Mighty Bulwark, albeit a little bit later than you actually get access to the feat. With this, our reflex save is going to look better across the board. Full Plate already gave us Bulwark, which did give us a little bit of a reflex boost against abilities like Fireball, but with Mighty Bulwark, that's applying to everything now. And so instead of a weakness that has specific coverage, it's now just a huge coverage that we have. This is also why I recommended going all into Charisma instead of touching Dexterity at all. Obviously, it's a long road to finally get Mighty Bulwark here at level 12 if you aren't using archetype feats, but it pays off by giving you more reliable intimidations, and getting good intimidation means things are easier to crit. Things being easier to crit means their ACs are tanking faster. For your skill feat, pick up whichever movement athletics feat you didn't already have between Quick Climb and Swim. We're about to hit Legendary in Athletics, so you're about to be incredibly mobile. At level 13, you can advance that third skill. Like I said, I utilized Stealth up to Master here, and then I took Bounce Back for the Ancestry feat. The ability to shake off a wounded condition once per day, especially as a character who will frequently be taking a lot of hits, is definitely worth the feat. You'll also finally hit Master with weapons, which will end what was likely a couple of more difficult levels in terms of accuracy. Inventors definitely struggle to hit around level 10 to 12. Level 13 is where those struggles kind of dissipate, and until the end of the game, Inventor feels fine from there on out. At level 14, we're going to finally start gaining some moves that take the build from solid to really, really good. This is where everything picks up, and we start getting more of that Bell-Bearing Hunter flair. At level 14, pick up Explosive Maneuver. Whenever you land a Megaton strike, or just a standard strike, you can make any maneuver without taking the multiple attack penalty into account until after the maneuver. Personally, I recommend Trip as you smash your opponent down to the ground. It gets rid of some actions and can set up them being off guard for the next turn, but grapples can work just as well. Since we have a high athletics, strength, and likely the item bonus from our weapon, you'll be really, really accurate with these. For skill feat, I recommend Terrified Retreat. If you critically demoralize a creature lower level than you, that creature is going to run away, which is very Bell-Bearing Hunter, because running away is about how I reacted to the Bell-Bearing Hunter the first time I ran into it in Limgrave. At level 15, we run into an issue with our ability scores. If we advance the same Strength, Con, Int, and Charisma, everything except Int will hit our max capacity. If you aren't playing to level 20, obviously this is fine, and you can even just take that Intelligence boost and put it somewhere else. But if you are, I recommend diverting either your Charisma or Constitution boost into either Dexterity or Wisdom. Personally, I recommend taking your Constitution and boosting it into Wisdom, which is going to boost your will save up, though Dexterity can give you a little bit of a stealth boost. Make sure you still max Strength out at +5 and keep pushing up that int. At the same time, you'll finally hit Legendary in Athletics, and especially considering Strength isn't even our primary stat, we have crazy high pluses to grapple and trip, as well as a swim and climb speed, which gives us a ton of mobility. For your general feat, I recommend here taking Canny Acumen in either Reflex or Perception. That way, at level 17, you're going to bump up to Master in one of those. Inventor saves are not great, and like I said, your Wisdom is already pretty low, so even a +2 in one of those things is going to help a lot. But most importantly, at level 15, we finally get the thing that we went Inventor for to get this bell-bearing style going. Extensible Weapon, which gives us reach on our greatsword. Now this is where we get a touch of flavor coming into play. When we're attacking at reach, I flavored it as this build throwing the sword forward, often hitting, then tripping an opponent, all at reach, before the sword rushed back into my hand. And the next levels are all about continuing to amplify this ability. You can also mix this really well with Enlarge to increase the range of your threat as the blade spins around you, tripping and damaging everything with some of the biggest minuses to AC that you'll see. Epic's items also start coming into the game around this point, and we're not actually going to boost our intelligence. We're instead going to build towards the Bracers of Strength. They're going to give us a +3 item bonus to all athletics checks to grab, trip, and more, and they'll bring us to a +6 strength, meaning we're going to be pretty accurate in melee for a class whose main stat is intelligence. It does give us just a little bit less of a chance to critically succeed on an overdrive, but all things considered, the chance to hit and crit and grab and succeed more on those is going to be more important overall to the build. At level 16, go for Persistent Boost to gain 1d8 persistent bludgeoning damage every time you land a hit with your distant blade. And you can take Cloud Jump as a skill feat because you're legendary in athletics, so why not? At level 17, you hit Master and Fortitude automatically, and whichever save that you chose through Canny Acumen boosts up to the same amount. You can become legendary in Intimidation, and most importantly, you get the Ancestry feat that we picked Talos up for, Metallic Skin. Once per day, in a fight that you don't need to move, spend 2 actions and gain a +2 status bonus to AC and a resistance 10 to all physical damage. Especially at level 18, which we're about to get to, you turn into a huge wall, attacking and controlling everything around you. Speaking of level 18, we're going to take Devastating Weaponry, which some of you might have seen coming, where your sword is now able to fly and attack with full 2-handed damage and no multiple attack penalty buildup until after the attack is complete, every single enemy within 30 feet. The fact that you could just walk into the center of a boss room and spread area damage among the minions as quickly, if not faster than the caster could, made this an incredibly dangerous character. To the DM. It was fine for me. I was usually okay. Depending on how your GM rules how Sweep interacts with Devastating Weaponry, it might also be nice to swap Manifold Alloy to Aerodynamic Constitution at this point. Since each attack roll is made separately, I can see an argument made that you get the +1 circumstance bonus to every single melee attack roll after the first, which is obviously good because you hit your first on whatever enemy has the lowest AC, and you work your way around the rest of the table with a +1 to everything. I could also see a GM argue Devastating Weaponry is not multiple attacks, since the multiple attack penalty doesn't increase. Remember, at the end of the day, I am not the arbiter of rules at your table, your GM is, and you should listen to them if they say something doesn't work, not me. Then, take Scare to Death as your skill feat, which is a great option to swap out with Demoralize as needed, and can also potentially trigger instant death on your mob enemies. From there, everything else is just icing on the cake. At level 19, I boosted my stealth to legendary, and took Incredible Investiture to max out the number of item slots we can take advantage of. We also advanced to Master and Heavy Armor, meaning that, especially when we activate Metallic Skin, we are second only to completely dedicated tank builds, and even then, we can sometime match them if we decide to pull out our shield. At level 20, our Intelligence is going to catch up with our Strength, hitting +6, and make sure your Constitution or Charisma is maxed, and then again, boost your Wisdom or Dex, whichever one you felt was more important. With this array, I personally ended up with a +6 Strength, namely due to the Apex, +1 Dex for Stealth, a +4 Constitution for 80 health and great fort saves, +6 Intelligence, +2 Wisdom, giving us a little bit better will saves, and a +4 Charisma. Now, if we were building for a campaign that started at level 20, we could take an earlier Strength boost and put that into Charisma. That way our Strength and Charisma could both max out at level 20. and here's what those two different arrays look like next to each other. Though the second is technically better optimized for a max build, not having max strength at level 15 makes the last stretch of levels absolutely miserable. In terms of level 20 feats though, full automation is actually not a great one. The ability to always be quickened to strike is alright, but since we're mostly using Megaton Strike on single targets or devastating weaponry on groups, you'll very rarely actually just say you'll swing. Now I have seen GMs that rule that you can use your quickened action on multi-action attacks that result in a strike, but again, I'm not the arbiter of rules at your table. If you play with that, full automation's really nice. Ubiquitous Overdrive is a great capstone feat on the other hand, providing huge damage buffs to your party, but you have to make space for Overdrive Ally and Shared Overdrive. If you have archetype feats, moving Mighty Bulwark to there gives you one of the feat slots, but you still have to give up at least one other feat to get the capstone. Similarly, we have all the skill feats we need. I took Swift Sneak here because now I'm a fast, sneaky, heavy armor build. In terms of our equipment, we're going to be making sure to keep ourselves as tanky as possible as much as possible, while also making our weapon focus on applying debuffs. In terms of skill items, we're obviously going to be looking for athletics, intimidation, and stealth. On top of that, any items that improve our perception to boost our initiative, or to boost our speed to deal with that full plate debuff is gonna come in handy. As I mentioned before, once we have that strength of +4 and the sentinel dedication, we can use the full plate armor for our best defensive option. If we keep a regularly upgraded fortification rune on there, it gives us a chance to negate incoming critical hits, which is huge, and shadow runes are a decent option for getting our item bonus to stealth if we don't want to worry about things like a Cloak of Elven Kind. For our weapon runes, the most important is obviously going to be Crushing, applying that clumsy and enfeebled one until the end of your next turn, and eventually upgrading to a greater Crushing rune for clumsy and enfeebled too. It makes them way easier to hit, makes your high AC become even more effective, and even lowers their reflex save for all your friendly neighborhood wizards. On top of that, Greater Crushing is just a level 9 rune that costs only 650 gold, which is a wild deal for how well it continues to scale into late levels. Now this is an uncommon rune, but as I mentioned, Inventor is already an uncommon class, so I assumed a lot of uncommon feats and items would be allowed. Though Fearsome will only occasionally help on a critical hit, Greater Fearsome making critical hits inflict Frighten 2 means that enemies that you crit the last turn will still have a -3 to their base AC when you attack the next round. On top of that, you can only demoralize a creature once per combat, and if you crit fail, you're kinda SOL. So adding in the Fearsome gives us another opportunity to get that debuff up and running. Finally, Keen ends up being the best final weapon rune, especially if you're fighting things player level +3 or higher, where there's no way that you can crit without a 20. Adding that 19 dice roll that's going to start the snowball to Frighten 2, Enfeebled 2, Clumsy 2, and Off Guard, it is well worth the rune slot. There are few things in Pathfinder 2e as satisfying as removing the boss's level advantage with 10% of your rolls, even before there's any setup or buffing going on. We're going to also make sure we keep an upgraded Crafter's Eyepiece, which is going to give us an easier time entering into Overdrive, which is going to do a ton of damage every single hit. Now for Intimidation, the Demon's Mask works pretty well, though the fear spell it comes with ends up falling off pretty quickly. If you didn't use the Shadow rune on your armor, I usually recommend a Cloak of Elven Kind. A bonus to stealth combined with a once-a-day invisibility does give you a little magical assistance when that low dex is too much to overcome to get the advantage on your enemies. Past that, there are a ton more items that can work really well to continue enhancing yourself. If you use the variant archetypes to access wizard spells for the buffing potential, a Ring of Wizardry can provide more hastes and sure strikes, meaning more actions and more chances to trigger critical hits. On top of that, a stock of Potions of Quickness are great for applying a quick haste to yourself. Charms of Energy Resistance are also never a bad place to spend your gold. Being able to take less damage from everything is always good. Finally, that heavier shield always makes your shield block more valuable if you ever need to be playing defensive as you're trying to get the snowball rolling in combat. A shield is never a bad thing to have, and since we have shield block and we have such a high AC, this build works just as well focusing on one-handing the sword alongside the shield. I don't have a full build list for the archetype feats because this is where you can start getting it really personal here. I do recommend, if you can, taking Mighty Bulwark as an archetype feat to open up at least one feat slot for Overdrive Ally. As I mentioned, since full automation is just an alright capstone without the GMs playing with the rules a little bit, you just need to give up one more feat level 8 or higher to get Overdrive Ally, Showed Overdrive, and Ubiquitous Overdrive. Now how good these feats are very party dependent, but for this specific character, I had a Flurry Ranger in my party with this build, and adding another +6 to every single hit, combined with a -6 AC debuff, meant that if I set up, the Flurry Ranger would move forward and do Impossible Flurry and crit on everything. But 4 archetypes to look into, I already mentioned Mauler, which will provide you access to advanced weapons. The Roka Sword in particular is a really good weapon for this build. It only increases to a D10 instead of a D12 on two-handed attacks, but it also adds a deadly D8. And if we're successfully chaining crits together, those deadly dice are going to give us more damage than the D12s were. Since we have a high intelligence, we can also take really good advantage of things like the Wizard archetype, which can combine with the Ring of Wizardry to cast Haste, Enlarge, and other low-level buffs like Sure Strike, or defensive buffs like Mirror Image for just a little bit more survivability. Fighter can also be nice if there's any fighter feats you might be interested in, but the most direct archetype that's going to help us here is Wrestler. Did you critically fail a grapple check? You've got something for that. Did you want more damage on your trips? You can start suplexing people. These feats are all really good, and they give us free skill progression and skill checks, which means more flexibility in terms of making the character what you want it to be. But all in all, this is about what a finished Bell-Bearing Hunter looks like. Appearing out of the shadows with that legendary stealth, grabbing from around 30 feet away as we swing the sword around, applying tons of debuffs, and doing frankly absurd amount of damage as we continue pressing in and keeping the advantage. Thanks for watching, and let me know if there's another boss from any game or just another character who you'd love to see a Pathfinder 2e build for. I like to try to get creative with these and make them as fun and engaging as possible, and though I want to make a couple other build videos about the Call of the Ocean builds, and as I get the second campaign edited and started up, some build talks about those, both in terms of the players and some of the bosses I created, I'm really excited to start breaking into some of those builds. So, without further ado, have a great rest of your day, and best of luck out there!